My name is Hannah Miller. I'm 31. And this is the story of how I found a box of old letters that made me question everything I believed about my father, my stepmother, and my own childhood. If you enjoy real-life stories like mine, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. I didn't go back home looking for answers. I went because my dad asked for help. He and my stepmom, Lavra, were finally selling the house I grew up in, and after nearly 3 decades, it was packed with things no one had touched in years. Old furniture, school projects, boxes stacked on boxes. The kind of clutter that holds more memories than value. The attic was the last place I wanted to be. It always felt cramped and too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Still, I climbed the ladder that morning with a cup of coffee and a vague sense of obligation. Sunlight cut through the dust as I shifted boxes closer to the opening, trying not to think too hard about how final everything felt. That's when I saw it. A small cardboard box wedged behind an old dresser. No label, no marker, just sealed with yellowed tape. It didn't belong with the holiday decorations or the broken lamps. It looked hidden, intentionally forgotten. I wish I'd ignored it. Inside were bundles of letters tied together with faded blue ribbon. Every envelope was handwritten. I recognized my dad's handwriting instantly. I'd seen it on birthday cards and permission slips my whole life. The return address was always the same. Our house. The name on the front made my chest tighten. Lavra. These letters were dated years before she became my stepmom, before she officially entered our lives, before my mom died. I sat down hard on the attic floor, my heart racing, and untied the ribbon with hands that suddenly felt unsteady. The first letter was dated April of 1999. That date hit me harder than I expected. That was the year my mom was diagnosed. The year everything in our family quietly fell apart while we pretended nothing was wrong. I tried to tell myself not to assume the worst. Maybe they were friends. Maybe it was innocent. It wasn't. The words were intimate, familiar. My dad wrote about missing her voice, about stolen moments, about how complicated everything had become. One line talked about waiting. Another mentioned timing. Then I saw a sentence that made my breath catch. He mentioned a child. I stopped reading after that. My vision blurred and my ears rang. I folded the letters back into the box like that could somehow undo what I'd just learned. Like closing the lid would put my family back together. Growing up, I thought our story was sad, but simple. My mom got sick, she passed away, my dad grieved. Years later, Lavra came into the picture and eventually she became my stepmother. It wasn't perfect, but it made sense. Now nothing did. I stayed in the attic longer than I meant to, replaying memories I'd never questioned before. Lavra showing up around our family earlier than I remembered. How quickly she seemed comfortable in our routines. The way my dad avoided conversations about the months before my mom died. At the time, I thought it was grief. Now it felt like avoidance. I didn't say anything that day. I put the box back exactly where I found it and climbed down the ladder like nothing had happened. At dinner, I smiled when expected. I listened. I watched my dad and Lavra interact like my world hadn't shifted off its axis. That night changed everything. Lying in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit yet. If those letters were real, then the timeline I'd built my life around wasn't. And if there really was a child, then whatever secret they'd been hiding was bigger than I was ready for. I didn't know it then, but opening that box meant there was no going back. I didn't sleep much after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my dad's handwriting looping across the page. Saw that single word replaying itself in my head like a warning I couldn't shut off. Child by morning. I felt hollowed out, like something essential had been scooped out of me and replaced with questions. I went through the day on autopilot. My dad was already up, sorting papers at the kitchen table, the same way he always did. Lavra moved around the kitchen, making coffee, humming softly. It all looked so normal it made my stomach hurt. I wondered how many mornings they'd shared like this while keeping something so big buried. Did you sleep okay? Lavra asked casually. Yeah, I lied. Just tired. She nodded and went back to what she was doing. No hesitation, no guilt on her face. That almost bothered me more than anything else. If they were hiding something, they were good at it. Later that afternoon, I found an excuse to go back up to the attic. I told myself I just wanted clarity, that I needed to understand before jumping to conclusions. The box was still where I left it. My hands trembled as I pulled it out again like it might bite me. This time, I read everything. The letters spanned years. Not months, years. They talked about sneaking phone calls, about meeting halfway between cities, about the strain of pretending nothing was happening. My dad wrote about responsibility, about promises he felt trapped by. Lavra wrote back in a softer hand, reassuring him, telling him she understood, that she was willing to wait. And woven through it all were references to a child. Not a hypothetical one. A real one. Appointments, expenses, worry about the future, about when the truth would finally come out. One letter mentioned a birthday, another talked about school. I felt sick. There was a point where the tone shifted. My dad's letters became heavier, more conflicted. He wrote about my mom's illness, about guilt, about how everything was happening faster than he'd expected. Laura's responses were careful, supportive. She reminded him that things would settle eventually, that they just had to get through the hard part. The hard part. I sat back against the attic wall and hugged my knees to my chest, trying to steady my breathing. My mom had been sick, vulnerable, and during that time, my dad had been carrying on an entire second life. Whether or not he loved my mom, he'd betrayed her in the worst possible way. And me. Because every childhood memory I had was suddenly suspect, every family photo, every holiday. All of it now came with an invisible asterisk I couldn't ignore. I took photos of the letters with my phone, my hands moving on instinct. I didn't know what I planned to do with them, but I knew I couldn't leave this behind like it didn't matter. That evening, my dad asked if I wanted to go through old photo albums with him. The irony almost made me laugh. Maybe later, I said. I have a headache. He looked disappointed, and for a split second I wondered if he sensed something had shifted. If he knew I was standing on the edge of a truth he'd spent decades avoiding. That night, I started searching online. It felt invasive, but I couldn't stop myself. I typed Laura's maiden name into search bars, scrolled through social media, dug deeper than I ever had before. It didn't take long to find what I wasn't sure I wanted to see. A profile photo. A woman in her early 20s standing next to Lavra, both of them smiling at the camera. The caption said, "So proud of my girl." My heart pounded as I scrolled. The girl's name was Emily, her age lined up perfectly. I stared at her face for a long time, looking for something familiar. Her smile, her eyes, the shape of her jaw. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't help comparing her to my dad. That's when the reality finally sank in. This wasn't just about the past. This was about a sister I never knew existed. I couldn't look away from Emily's picture, even after my phone screen dimmed and locked. I unlocked it again, zoomed in, and studied her face like it might confess something if I stared long enough. She looked happy, normal, unaware that her existence had just detonated a quiet bomb inside my chest. I felt angry, then guilty for feeling angry, then strangely protective of someone I'd never met. Whatever secret my dad and Lavra had buried, Emily hadn't chosen it. She was just living her life while mine was quietly unraveling. That realization made everything heavier than I expected somehow. I didn't tell anyone what I'd found, but the secret followed me everywhere. It sat at the kitchen table with us, hovered in the hallway, pressed against my back when I lay down to sleep. Every laugh felt forced. Every normal conversation felt staged. I watched my dad closely, noticing small things I'd ignored before, like how carefully he chose his words, or how Lavra sometimes looked at him before answering simple questions. They weren't dramatic signs, just subtle ones, but now they felt impossible to unsee. It was exhausting carrying truth without permission to speak to anyone at all. I thought about confronting them 100 times and backed out every time. What would I even say? I found your letters. I know about Emily. Each version ended with denial, anger, or some carefully framed explanation meant to soften betrayal. I wasn't ready for any of it. More than that, I was afraid of what confirming the truth would cost me. Once spoken aloud, it couldn't be put back. Silence, as painful as it was, felt safer for now. At least silence allowed me time to breathe and plan before everything inevitably exploded into something irreversible and deeply permanent. A few days later, I met my best friend Rachel for coffee, hoping distraction would help. It didn't. She took one look at me and knew something was wrong. We'd grown up together, shared secrets, heartbreaks, and bad decisions. Keeping this from her felt impossible. I told her everything in a low voice, my hands wrapped tightly around my mug. When I finished, she didn't interrupt. She just sat there, processing, like she was holding something fragile. Finally, she asked the question I'd been avoiding myself since the moment I opened that box upstairs and changed my life completely forever. "What are you going to do?" Rachel asked gently. I didn't have an answer. Saying it out loud made that clear. Part of me wanted to pretend Emily didn't exist, to protect what little stability I had left. Another part wanted to confront my dad immediately and demand the truth. Consequences be damned. Rachel reminded me that I didn't owe anyone silence, but I did owe myself care. That idea stuck with me more than anything else she said. I left the cafe knowing I couldn't rush this decision without hurting myself in ways that might never fully heal again. That night, I dreamed about my mom for the first time in years. She was standing in our old kitchen, healthy, smiling, asking me why I looked so worried. I woke up with tears on my face and a heaviness in my chest I couldn't explain. It felt like my past and present were colliding, forcing me to finally see my parents as flawed humans instead of fixed memories. The pedestal I'd placed my dad on was cracking, and I wasn't sure what would be left. Once the truth fully surfaced and demanded to be acknowledged by me alone eventually. Over the next week, I watched Lavra more closely than ever. She wasn't cruel or cold. If anything, she was kind in the ways that mattered. She asked if I was okay. She brought me soup when I claimed to be sick. That kindness complicated my anger. It reminded me that people are rarely just villains or victims. Still, every time she smiled at me, I wondered how much she knew about my childhood pain, and whether she ever felt responsible for rewriting the story I'd lived without my consent, while calling it love or patience or something easier to justify. By the end of the week, I understood one thing clearly. The truth wasn't just waiting in that attic box. It was already shaping my choices. I could keep pretending, protecting their comfort at the expense of my own clarity, or I could ask the questions I'd been taught not to ask. Either way, something would break. I just had to decide whether it would be me or the silence they'd built their life around. And deep down, I knew the next step was inevitable, no matter how much I delayed it or tried to soften the impact on everyone. I chose a Sunday afternoon to confront them, mostly because it was the only time all three of us were guaranteed to be home and not rushing anywhere. The house was quiet in that uneasy way that comes before a storm, the kind where everything feels suspended, waiting. My dad was in the living room reading the paper. Lavra was folding laundry at the dining table. They looked comfortable, settled. I stood there for a moment, watching them, wondering how many times they'd rehearsed this moment in their heads, even if they'd pretended it would never come. "Can we talk?" I asked. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Both of them looked up at the same time. My dad smiled faintly, like he thought this was about logistics or memories or something harmless. Laura's expression tightened, just a little. It was subtle, but I noticed. "Sure," my dad said. "What's going on?" I sat down across from them, my hands clasped together so tightly my fingers hurt. For a second, I couldn't speak. Then I took a breath and said the words I'd practiced in my head all week. "I found the letters." The silence that followed was deafening. My dad's face drained of color. Lavra froze, one sock still in her hands. No one pretended to misunderstand. No one asked what letters. That told me everything I needed to know. "How much did you read?" My dad asked quietly. "All of them," I said. "I know about Emily." Laura's eyes filled instantly. She set the laundry down like it was suddenly too heavy to hold. My dad leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face with both hands, like he'd aged 10 years in the span of seconds. "We plan to tell you someday," he said. "That's what everyone says when they run out of time," I replied. He flinched. Lavra reached for his hand, then hesitated, pulling back when she realized how that looked. I felt anger rise, sharp and unexpected, cutting through weeks of numbness. "Was Mom sick when this started?" I asked. Neither of them answered right away. That was answer enough. "Yes," my dad said finally. "But it wasn't like that. Things were already complicated." "Your mom and I don't," I said. Don't rewrite my childhood like I wasn't there. His eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I thought about my mom, about hospital rooms and quiet evenings, and the sympathy hardened into resolve. Lavra spoke then, her voice shaking. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't plan for any of this to happen the way it did. But it did, I said. And I had a right to know. They told me everything after that. How Lavra got pregnant, how my dad panicked, how they decided it was better if Emily grew up away from us, with stability, with fewer questions, how they convinced themselves they were protecting everyone. Listening to them felt like standing outside my own life, hearing strangers explain decisions that shaped me without my consent. I lost my mom, I said softly. And you decided I also needed to lose a sister I didn't even know existed. My dad started crying then, really crying, his shoulders shaking. Lavra followed, apologizing over and over, but the words felt hollow. Apologies didn't give me back the years. They didn't erase the sense of being excluded from my own family story. I need space, I said, standing up. I don't know what this looks like going forward, but I can't pretend everything is fine. They didn't stop me when I left the room. That night, I packed a bag and drove back to my apartment, the house shrinking in my rearview mirror like something from a life I no longer fully recognized. For the first time since I found the letters, I felt a strange sense of relief. The secret wasn't mine alone anymore. The truth was out in the open, messy and painful, but real. I didn't know what came next, or how to fit Emily into my understanding of family, but I knew one thing for certain. Silence had protected them. Speaking had finally protected me. The weeks after the confrontation were quieter than I expected. No dramatic phone calls. No frantic apologies flooding my inbox, just space. At first, the silence felt heavy, like something unfinished was pressing down on me. Then slowly, it began to feel like room to breathe. I went back to my routines, back to work, back to being a version of myself that wasn't constantly bracing for the next emotional hit. But even in the quiet, the truth stayed with me, reshaping how I saw everything that came before it. My dad texted occasionally, short messages. Hope you're okay. Thinking about you. I didn't respond right away. Not out of punishment, but because I needed time to understand what forgiveness would even mean now. Forgiveness didn't feel like forgetting. It felt more like deciding what I was willing to carry forward and what I needed to put down for good. That distinction mattered more than I realized. Lavra sent one message. It was long, carefully written, and full of accountability. She didn't excuse herself. She didn't ask for absolution. She just said she was sorry for the pain she caused, and that she understood if I never wanted a relationship with her again. Reading it made me cry, not because it fixed anything, but because it acknowledged something my childhood never had. Honesty, that was new and strange. And somehow necessary. Emily was harder. I thought about her constantly, even though I'd never spoken to her. I wondered if she knew the truth about where she came from. If she ever felt like something in her life didn't quite add up. I imagined her discovering this the way I had, through fragments and silence, and it made my chest ache. Whatever resentment I felt toward my dad and Lavra didn't belong to her. She didn't ask to be born into secrecy. None of us did. One night, after hours of staring at my phone, I sent her a message. I kept it simple. I told her my name. I told her who my father was. I told her I didn't expect anything from her, but that if she ever wanted to talk, I was here. I stared at the screen for a long time before hitting send, knowing there was no taking it back. She replied the next day. She said she'd always known there was more to the story. She said she'd wondered if she had siblings somewhere out there. She said she was scared, but also curious. We agreed to take things slow, no expectations, no pressure. Just two people acknowledging a shared truth and letting it exist without forcing it into a neat shape. Meeting her in person a few weeks later felt surreal. We looked alike in small, undeniable ways. The same hands. The same nervous laugh. Sitting across from her, I felt grief for what we lost, but also gratitude for what was still possible. We talked for hours about our lives, our childhoods, our differences. There was no instant sisterly bond, no dramatic moment of closure, just connection. Real and imperfect and enough. My relationship with my dad is still complicated. Some days are easier than others. We've had long conversations, hard ones, where he's had to listen without defending himself. I don't excuse what he did. I don't rewrite the past to make it more comfortable. But I also don't let his worst choices define my entire understanding of him anymore. He's flawed, human, capable of love and betrayal at the same time. Accepting that was painful, but freeing. Looking back, I realized the secret hurt not just because of what it was, but because of what it stole. Trust, choice, agency. Families tell themselves lies in the name of protection all the time, but silence has a cost. It shapes lives without permission. It creates distance where there doesn't need to be any. What I've learned is this. Truth doesn't guarantee peace, but it does create the possibility for it. I can't change what my parents did, or the years that passed without answers. But I can choose honesty now. I can choose boundaries. I can choose connection where it feels healthy and distance where it doesn't. Family should be about love, not control. And for the first time in my life, I'm building mine on my own terms.